So initially, anytime I meet someone, whether it's for an interview or interrogation, uh, I want to go into that session with the mindset of being unbiased.
Hmm.
I don't typically like to hear outside guidance or influences to sway my process or judgment. Hey, we think this guy's guilty or this person may be innocent. Um, I need to go into any interview or interrogation with giving that person a clean slate. Everyone deserves a fair chance. I'm looking at how that individual is going to approach me. I'm trying to find out, are they being overly anxious? Are they complaining that they have to leave before we even begin? Do they seem uninterested? But ultimately, I want to give that person opportunity to tell me their side of the story and in their words and not mine. So, I want to go in ultimately with the mindset of, hey, you've got a clean slate. We're starting at ground zero, and let's just work our way up here from the rapport building stage till we get down to the meat and potatoes.
Hmm.
So with the micro expressions, initially when I first started learning about them, it was in the, I'd say, mid to late 60s, probably around 1966. The micro expressions were originally discovered by two gentlemen named Ernest Haggard and Kenneth Isaacs. And so they were scanning motion picture films of clinical reviews. And so ultimately, they were searched for nonverbal communications between therapists and their patients. And so as they reviewed those films, it was basically found that it was beneficial to observe the patients at different interval speeds, in addition to watching them in silence. And then they started watching them in backwards motion and changed the frames per second. And because of this, they were able to actually see dramatical changes in patients' faces within different frames of those films. And we call them micro expressions now, but back then they actually referred to them as MMEs, which were micro momentary expressions. And so a few years later, Paul Ekman, he later took that story and he ventured to Papua New Guinea to study nonverbal communication with the Fore people. And because of their isolation and cultural differences, uh, he wanted to make a comparison to see, did people of different lands and regions have some of the same expressions as we did. And as a result, his research determined that they also had the same universal traits and emotions, just like others across the world. And for the over the past 50 years, we've had individuals that have scientists that have continued studying these traits and behaviors. And what it was ultimately determined that there are 7 basic facial expressions that are shown across the faces of individuals from all cultures. And those 7 traits or expressions are happiness, sadness, anger, fear, surprise, disgust, and contempt. And so being armed with those 7 basic, and the funny thing is, as you said, it comes from the reptilian brain. We weren't taught how to do this. You're not an infant, and your parents don't teach you, all right, so when you want to show fear, make your mouth do this and make your eyes do this.
Hmm.
It's a natural instinct, which is a great thing because the body has its own defense mechanisms as far as protecting itself.
Hmm.
Interestingly, with the difference in the micro expression and macro expression, if you see that expression held on someone's face for more than 2 to 4 seconds, where now you're looking at a macro expression. And typically when we see photos that exhibit or display, that would be more so like a macro expression, but that's only because it was probably snapped real time when the emotion happened. But if you were to see that emotion or that expression lasting for more than 2 to 4 seconds, you're more than likely looking at a macro expression. And that may be a little bit of overkill, or it could be completely cosmetic.
And so is the feeling, and I don't know much about macro expressions actually, is the feeling like once it gets too far, 2 to 4 seconds, it starts to become inauthentic in some way?
Correct. So I would say probably the best way to describe that is if an individual say you plan a surprise party for someone and then they walked in the house and everyone says surprise, and then they just drop their mouth and they hold it there, just kind of like, oh my God. And they may have already known about the party possibly. And, it just a lot of times it's probably not going to appear as authentic as it should have been for that brief micro expression, split second to actually show the genuineness or the authenticity of it. You know, Sometimes when we hear things, I've got to put on a mad face because I know my friend is mad, and so I'm doing it purposely, or I'm trying to show happiness when I'm not really happy, and I'm going to hold that smile on my face more than at some point it starts to look a little bit awkward. So that would be the difference in a micro and a macro.